So let's move on to this week. We're going to do a little bit more on the eschatological man, which is, again, viewing man from the end of time. And the first part of today, we're going to be focusing on the vision of the sacrament of religious life, or the sacrament of holy orders, as well as the religious life. And so there's something beautiful within the gift of Christian celibacy. And so John Paul II takes some time to meditate upon that and see, what about those who were called to celibacy? What about their sexuality? How does that translate into showing the image of the Trinity? Because it's kind of clear so far in marriage, you have the husband and the wife, and the overflow of their love as a child. Well, what about men or women who forsake that life of marriage in order to be priests or nuns or brothers or sisters? What about them? So we look to Matthew 19, which is, for there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. A eunuch is someone physically incapable of sexual relations. A eunuch for the kingdom is someone who freely forgoes sexual relations as a sign of that state in which men and women neither marry nor are given in marriage. Now, to our world, which is overly sexualized, the celibate life seems crazy, right? Because you're like, how could you possibly give up sex? But in the realm of the theology of the body, what those who are celibate do on earth is they freely choose to skip the sacrament of marriage to show us the heavenly reality that awaits us in the marriage of the Lamb. Because ultimately, we as the bride of Christ, as the church, will be married to who? Christ, the bridegroom. And so within these vocations, we have a foreshadowing of that. We have the vision of that on earth. So persons who are in the sacrament of marriage, married couples, in their own way through that sacrament are an icon of the reality, the spousal analogy, the Trinitarian reality. But those who have these vocations, priests, nuns, sisters, brothers, etc., who are celibate for the sake of the kingdom, they skip the icon and bring the actual reality straight to earth through their vocation. Okay. So let's look at quote number 1. Christian revelation recognizes two specific ways of realizing the vocation of the human person in its entirety: to love, marriage, and virginity or celibacy. Either one in its own proper form, an actuation of the most profound truth about man, of his being created in the image of God as male and female. So what John Paul II is saying here is that both of these vocations show our maleness or our femaleness, and it's an actualization of who we are as human persons, created in the image and likeness of God. And now go to quote 3. In the Latin Church, priests are normally chosen from among men of faith who live a celibate life and who intend to remain celibate for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. So the way it's supposed to work is discerning celibacy first, okay, in the Roman Latin Rite. Person will discern if they're called to this celibacy first, and then once they've discerned that, then how will they live that out? And for men, it could be a priest, could be brother, could be a monk. For women, it could be being a cloistered nun, it could be being a sister in a religious order. There's lots of different ways to live out that vow of celibacy, but the first step is to discern if you are being called vocationally to live out the vow of celibacy. And so in the Latin Church, priests are chosen from those men who have been called to live out the vow of celibacy. Now, it's not true in some of the Eastern Rite. We're going to talk about that later. But that is how we do that in the Roman Catholic Church, in the Latin Rite. Now, the vision of the priest is that he stands in the person of Christ, in persona Christi Capitis, right? In the person of Christ the head. And he chooses to, because of that, marry the church as his bride. So the pastor of this church, Father Tim, right? Father Nick, sorry. Father Nick. So Father Nick is in person of Christ for this particular parish. He is the bridegroom of St. Gregory the Great. And all the parishioners here are his bride. Okay? And so that is true for every pastor, and for every bishop. The diocese is the bride of that bishop. Okay? Now, that's kind of profound because, when, Jesus is the perfect bridegroom. He's without sin, but human persons who are priests are imperfect, and they do make mistakes. Just like a human spouse, a human male husband makes mistakes. And so what does the wife do when her husband makes mistakes? Hopefully, maybe sleep on the couch. I don't know. The doghouse. Hopefully, correction in fraternal love, right? I mean, there should be, a sense of accountability between the husband and the wife, and helping that husband to improve and to realize those mistakes. And so there's accountability between the bride and the bridegroom.
And notice how you went to the men first.
Well, we're starting there. Now, consecrated women, their spouse is Christ himself. And you'll notice a lot of priests and a lot of nuns, they wear wedding bands, right? And they actually have wedding ceremonies when, at least the consecrated women have wedding ceremonies to be married to Jesus as their spouse. And I'll never forget, we have a sister at our school. Her name is Sister Lou. She's Sister of the Blessed Sacrament. And I joked with her one time, and I said, Sister, do you have that $20 that you owe me? She didn't owe me any money, but, I just was joking with her. And she's like, she thought for a minute, she says, why don't you take it up with my husband? And I was like, ooh. And she points to the crucifix, and I'm like, okay. Don't mess with you. I get it. You're protected. Men in high places. All right. So that's her quip whenever she feels messed with. She's like, take it up with my husband. Okay? So consecrated women have Christ as their spouse. And so what a more perfect spouse than that, right? You have the perfect spouse. So anyone who's celibate on earth skips the sacrament of marriage to show the ultimate reality of what's awaiting us in heaven, because we all will have that in heaven. Now, this reality is shown to us through the virginal marriage of Joseph and Mary. And because together with them, they showed and embraced the heavenly marriage and the earthly marriage simultaneously. So they're a prototype through their virginal marriage of the sacrament of marriage and the consecrated vocation type of marriage that we were just talking about in the priesthood and religious life, because they were a celibate marriage. And so you have this bridge here of this one marriage of the Holy Family, which shows both realities at the same time. And Christopher West said, husband, I'll talk to the wives first because I picked on the husbands first, okay? So wives, if you're not happy with your husband, okay, because he's imperfect, look to Jesus as your perfect spouse. Pray for your husband to Christ. Because Jesus is a perfect husband. He is a perfect spouse, and he will never let you down. So ask Jesus to give you the grace to love your spouse, to love your husband, and also pray for your husband. Husbands, when your wife lets you down, when she doesn't live up to your expectations, look to Mary as your perfect wife. Because she is not only our mother, but she is the perfect image of woman and wife. She's perfect spouse. And so when we know Mary, we know Jesus, and if there's no Mary, there's no Jesus, okay? Because she shows us Jesus and will ultimately lead us to her Son. So look to the Holy Family. Look to this marriage of Joseph and Mary. Look to Jesus and Mary if we ever feel down in our relationship with our human spouse, we can look to the perfection of this relationship. Now, a lot of people, when they look at Joseph, we're going to spend a little time talking about Joseph right now, they think of him as kind of this old guy, right? With this sort of understanding of him as like, and I had this too when I was growing up, that he's kind of somewhat like a 60, 70-year-old guy, Mary's 16, he's kind of robbing the cradle, and, he wasn't interested in her sexually because, he's an old guy. And so, therefore, it wasn't a big problem for him to be celibate in the marriage. Well, John Paul II kind of dispels that myth a little bit. And he also reflects upon the fact of when Mary was found with child and Joseph wanted to kind of put her away quietly, it wasn't because of the fact that he thought that she was guilty of adultery. He knew Mary. He knew how pure and holy she was. And so let's take a look at some quotes here, and we're going to unwrap this a little bit and see what's really going on in this virginal marriage of Joseph and Mary. So look at quote number 4. Joseph wanted to leave her, Mary, for the same reason Peter begged the Lord to leave him when he said, "Depart from me, O Lord, for I am a sinful man." He saw with fear and trembling that she bore the surest signs of the divine presence, and as a human being was afraid of the profundity of the mystery, and so he decided to leave her quietly. So he wasn't leaving her because he was fearful that she was a sinner and she committed adultery. He was trying to leave her quietly because he was in awe of her divine presence within her and of how holy she was. He didn't think of himself as worthy. Now think about it, in the Holy Family, you have Mary without original sin, perfectly holy, Jesus, who's the Son of God, and then Joseph, who's the human being and sinner. So guess whose fault it was every time something happened? Joseph's fault, right? So, Jesus and Mary never did anything wrong. That must have been a lot of pressure for Joseph, and that's why he's a saint, okay? Number 5, Joseph wanted to give the virgin her freedom, not because he suspected her of adultery, but out of respect for holiness. He was afraid to go and live with her. So it was this holy awe that he had of Mary, and just this awesome respect for the calling to be her caretaker, her human spouse. Number 6, then Joseph, stunned by her glory, gazing on the brilliance of her form, said, "O shining one, I see that a flame and hot coals encircle you. It frightens me, Mary. Protect me. Do not consume me. Your spotless womb has suddenly become a fiery furnace. Let it not melt me. I beg you, spare me." Okay, and that's from a mystic. The vision of the birth of Jesus. So that's Joseph's response to that. And then number 7, the difficulty of accepting the sublime mystery of their spousal communion has led some, since the 2nd century, to think of Joseph as advanced in age and to consider him Mary's guardian more than her husband. It is instead a case of supposing that he was not an elderly man at the time, but that his interior perfection, the fruit of grace, led him to live his spousal relationship with Mary with virginal affection. So what John Paul II is saying here, it wasn't that he was a celibate old man who just wasn't interested in sex anymore. It's that Joseph got it. He found the purity of heart through the redemption of his body and of his heart through his relationship with Mary and his son Jesus, so that he could purely and innocently love his wife. So Joseph is the reason why there's a lot of books and a lot of, he's the patron of fathers. He is that model that all of us men can look up to for that purity of sexual desire and that purity of spirit and mind.